Hello again everybody, back with another video. This time I'm looking at the deaths from COVID-19 within the vaxxed and unvaxxed groups or population in England, UK. And this, like the last two videos I made, the data comes from the UK Health Security Agency vaccine surveillance reports. And this one I'm looking at is week 44, so you can see in the background there I've got 3 front sheets from that report. Now the last two videos I've done were concerned with cases, but I'd actually miss the fact that there's tables with deaths in there as well. So it gives you some interest in reading, and analysis of that data is pretty enlightening, to say the least. So just so people know where this information comes from, it comes from the UK Gov website, and it's COVID-19 vaccine weekly surveillance reports 39 to 44, and basically if you follow this link here it will take you to the page and you can download the reports here. So this is week 44, click on it, download the PDF. I have the last 3 saved, and I analysed those for cases in the last video. And I'll come back to some of that data as well later in this presentation. So the reports that keep giving, that's where I say, because they've certainly gave us information about the fact there's more cases or positive tests in the vaccinated population, and it gives you some fairly striking data on deaths as well. So we will move on and look at those. But before we do, what I will say is the data always appears to match the narrative, and I firmly believe to a major extent the narrative is the driver. But where that data contradicts the narrative and all the various edicts such as vaccine passports and things like that, and mandates and God knows what, I'm going to expose it. So the data I'm about to highlight blatantly contradicts the narrative. So here's the front sheet of the report for week 44, and this is table 4A, and this covers basically the deaths within 28 days of a positive test of COVID-19 by the date of death between the weeks 40 and 43. So it gives us the age ranges, and very importantly it gives us not vaccinated total deaths and fully vaccinated, double jabbed as they say, deaths. So these are the non-vaccinated people and these are the fully vaccinated people, and you can see just straight away from the figures that there's a massive increase in the, especially in the 70 to 79s and the over 80s. Big difference. Less so in the non-vaccinated, but there probably is hardly any non-vaccinated people in that age range. So it could be a factor of that interfering. But one thing this doesn't do, it doesn't put in the totals. It doesn't give any real scientific analysis of the data. And we also have part B, which is the deaths within 60 days. Now, the 28 days to me is the most important, because that's the kind of factor they've been using to count COVID deaths. So if you get a test positive and you fall off a ladder and die, or drop down dead with a heart attack, then you are a COVID death. So again, we can look at those and you can see where the big numbers are in the older age group. Okay. Now what I've done is I've imported that data into an Excel spreadsheet. So this is one worksheet, and this is the deaths within 28 days. And you can see the age ranges. You can cross-check the numbers, but they are right. These are the totals. I've totalised the full amount, 3,085. The non-vaccinated is 538. And the double-dosed vaccinated people is 2,447. So quite a big data set, really. And I've totalised these, and I've added these two together and taken each number as a percentage of that. I've not included this one here, I just included this data. So we've got 18% of the overall deaths is non-vaccinated, and a whopping 82% is double jabbed. And this is table 4B, and this is for the deaths within 60 days following a positive test. Again, we've got very similar figures. This time we've got 18.2% and 81.8%, so virtually the same levels. Now, when you look at that data in terms of a pie chart, or could class it as a cake, we've got a massive portion here. The 2447 is the vaccinated double jabbed, which is 82%, and the smaller 538 is the unvaccinated deaths, which is 18%. Okay, so that means that 4 out of 5 people dying within 20 days of a positive test in week 44 are fully vaccinated. 4 out of 5. Now, when I kind of think that this data is put there, out there for people to see the truth in plain sight, but people's programming probably won't even get them to look at this data in the first place. And if they do look at it, they'll get so far and they'll see a statement I'm going to bring up in a minute and say, oh yeah, that explains it, and leave. But the reason I think that this kind of data is put out there to put truth in plain sight is when you see numbers like this, if you add all the numbers of 2,447 and 538 together, you get 33 for masonry. Could it be a coincidence? I don't tend to think that is. And if we look at the deaths within 60 days, we've still got 4 out of 5 people dying within 60 days of a positive test are fully vaccinated. So there's that 81.8 and there's that 18.2. So the whopping big area of double jabbed and the small area of unvaccinated. But look at the totals. Now, I've added these totals up. They weren't in the table, but it's 3,011. And what are 3 11s? They're 33. And here we've got 6, 6 and an inverted 6 for 666. So very, very strange. But there you go. We've got the marker masonry on that one. Now, the text that supports those tables talks about the fact there is a very large portion of double jabbed dying compared to unvaccinated, but what they explain it as, in the context of very high vaccine coverage in the population, even with a highly effective vaccine, they're always highly effective, it's expected that a large proportion of cases, hospitalizations and deaths would occur in the vaccinated individuals simply because a larger proportion of the population are vaccinated than unvaccinated, and no vaccine is 100% effective. So you could argue, yeah, that's true. So that's it. We've looked as far enough. These conspiracy theories and all these theorists are all a pile of tin foil wearing nutters. But is that true? Before we go on, I'd just like to show you the summary of the UK vaccination progress. Call it progress if you wish. We've got on this, there's the link, we've got the fact that 80% of people over 12 are double jabbed. So we've got 80%. So isn't that strange that we've got basically 4 out of 5 aged 12 plus are fully vaccinated, and we've got 4 out of 5 people dying are fully vaccinated. Now surely if the vaccines were effective, this slice of the cake should be a lot smaller, not in the same proportion, because just simply looking at that, you would have to say, what on earth is the vaccine doing? On that basis, it doesn't appear to be doing a lot. Now, what I'd like to look at now is the theoretical effect of vaccination. So what would the distribution of deaths be amongst vaccinated and unvaccinated people with an 80% vaccination rate using a 90% effective vaccine? So let's take 100 people who are doomed to die within 28 days of a positive test unless there is some medical intervention. Now let's vaccinate 80% of them with a 90% effective vaccine. So here's our 80, that's 80% people, and here's our 20 unvaccinated. So these are protected and these aren't. Okay, it's fairly simple. So now it's time for the deadly COVID to kill. So now we've got our 80 people and here we've got our 20 people. So these are the vaxxed and these are the unvaxxed. So that's what happens when we vax them. Then the number of people within the vaccinated group protected will equal 72. That's 90% of 80. So 8 will die. Okay, so 72 will be protected, leaving an unlucky group of 8. So these 8 people are doomed here, and these 20 dirty, horrible, unvaccinated people, well, they've got no chance. So unfortunately, they're taken out by the COVID. Now what does that mean? That means we've got 8 people die in the vaccinated group, which is 29%, and we've got 20 people that die in the unvaccinated group. That's 71%. So when we look at what we're actually getting, we're getting 82% vaccinated double jabs dying. We're getting 29 here, and we're getting 18% unvaccinated when the unvaccinated deaths should be 71. So that statement they said earlier wasn't quite true. And looking at that another way, so this is week 44, reported vaccinated deaths and unvaccinated deaths. This is within 28 days of a positive test versus the theoretical vaccinated deaths that I've just covered. An 80% vax rate and a 90% effective vax. So here's the vaccinated deaths, week 44, here's report, here's the unvaccinated deaths, 82 to 18, theoretical vaccinated deaths, 29 to 71. It's the other way around. So what they've said is not true. It's not true, it's wrong. What that shows you is if 80% are vaxxed, the vaccine is doing nothing based on these figures. It should be showing us something like this. So that statement in that report is wrong, big time wrong. Okay, so basically sick old people are still dying, vaxxed or not vaxxed, basically. Now, going back to the previous video, these were the positive tests per 100,000 people in the vaxxed and unvaxxed population for all ages. And we had basically more vaccinated cases than unvaccinated. And this was normalised per 100,000 people unvaxxed and per 100,000 people vaxxed. So they are comparable numbers. And there was actually 1.09 times more in the vaccinated than the unvaccinated. And when we looked at, when we looked at the 18 plus population, so all the people are getting all the restrictions through vax passports and loads of pressure to get vaccinated, we've got 1.7 times more infections in the vaccinated than in the unvaccinated. So this destroys vaccine passports. And the other one kind of destroys the effectiveness of the vaccines in the first place at preventing deaths. So, this is my interpretation of this data, and it is credible government data. The data clearly shows that vaccine mandates and vaccine passports have no credible scientific basis and will do little to protect the public if they ever needed protection. They don't. Vaccines don't appear to be making any overall impression on deaths. So that means either the vaccines are not as effective as claimed, and or the vaccination rates are nowhere near as high as they claim. I think the vaccination rates are high, and I think it's more the fact that the word effective, can you have a zero effective? But, they can't be doing a lot, can they? A vaccine is certainly not preventing infection. As we said, the 18 plus age group, there are 1.7 times more infections in the vaxxed than the unvaxxed. So it doesn't appear to be reducing transmission either. And basically the mandates and the passports are being used for coercion, unless government scientists are completely useless and politicians are as thick as pig shit. But I doubt that. There's a fixed narrative and plan going on here. The restrictions are being kind of drip fed in, and they're greater and greater. You take more steps forward than steps backwards, and they're jumping, leaping bounds and bounds in Australia, where they're trying everything out to the extreme. But I think it will come to us at some point in the future. There is no doubt a central control for the entire world, and I believe there's dark, evil intent there, and they are laughing at us, guys, when they release data that I've just covered. The governments, following their puppet masters in the central control group, are at war with their people at the moment, and the unvaxxed are a significant target, and there is no science, as you've just seen, behind any of it. And let's just take a look at what is happening. I think it's in Brisbane in Australia, so we'll play this little video.
Play from the Premier, there's no doubt about it, that you have to try and get people to lose something in order to get something. And look, there are going to be dramas, I'm sure, especially around the Gold Coast area, but there's only really one decision for people to make.
Yep. Oh, they're crazy not to get vaccinated. Life will be miserable without being vaccinated. You won't be able to get any, you won't be able to hide, you won't be able to get a doctor to sign off that you got an exclusion, because there's quite set rules on that, and doctors will be audited to see every one of their exclusions will be looked at very carefully. They'll get fined, they can get struck off. The patients who tell lies can be charged with fraud. There's a whole pile of issues, whole pile of problems if you try and get around the system. It's going to be very hard to maintain your employment if you're not vaccinated. You won't be able to go anywhere for any entertainment. So by all means, get vaccinated. You've got another week where you can get double vaccinated before the 15th to 17th of December, when it's definitely coming in, and there'll be proof that you've been vaccinated, firm proof. You'll be asked to show going into most venues. So get vaccinated, otherwise you're going to have a very, very lonely life, and you're not going to be able to maintain your employment.
So there you go. Just look at what's going on there. And then when you look at this data, this is England, but I'm sure human beings in other parts of the world will react to the same vaccines in the same way. So it's quite applicable data across the board, and it just shows you what's going on. Okay, so let's just have a quick look at what the politicians have said about the vaccine early in the year, kind of in terms of the claims they've made.
We think that all the vaccines that we're using, both the vaccines that we're currently using, are effective in, as I say, in stopping serious disease and death. We also think, in particular in the case of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, that there's good evidence that it is stopping transmission as well. I think 67% reduction in transmission with the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. So they remain of a massive benefit to our country and to the population as we go through the pandemic. And I've no doubt that vaccines generally are going to offer the way out. And with every day that goes by, you can see that medicine is slowly getting the upper hand over the disease.
And it shows the world that the Oxford vaccine works effectively. And the really good news embedded in it is that it not just reduces hospitalizations. There were no people in this part of the trial who were hospitalized with COVID after getting the Oxford jab, but also it reduces the number of people who have COVID at all, even asymptomatically, by around 2/3.
You get really very, very good protection with the booster.
I want to emphasize that the vaccines provide very strong protection from severe illness from COVID-19. I know there's a lot of confusion and misinformation, but the world's leading scientists confirm that if you are fully vaccinated, your risk of severe illness from COVID-19 is very low.
So there you go. It's very effective at reducing death. It's probably great at reducing substantially transmission. And from that data, neither of those are true. Okay, so let's have a look at what's happening at the moment in the UK. We've got UK care homes from today. The deadline was that care home staff have to be vaccinated. I know somebody that worked in an office weren't facing patients, face-to-face meetings or anything, and they've lost their job. But fortunately, they found a new one, so that's great news. And we've also got COVID passes being extended in Wales to cinemas and theatres, so just running up to Christmas, I suppose. That's going to impact on the businesses as well as the people's lives, but that's happening in Wales. It's not happening in England yet, but I'm sure it's going to come, and I'm sure the unvaccinated are going to get persecuted because they're just not towing the line and doing what Big Brother tells them to do. And now we've got COVID-19 mandatory jabs. that's a bit of a slip, isn't it? Mandatory jobs. There's mandatory loss in jobs with this goes through, but they are going to put in mandatory jabs for frontline NHS staff. Where they're short of staff now, they'll be even shorter then. And this is not just for the NHS. There's 103,000 staff in the health service in England that remained unvaccinated, and then there's 105,000 domiciliary care workers as well that can be affected. So that's what you want to do, isn't it? Take away the care for the elderly. Maybe they'll die off quicker and they'll hit the targets there, but clearly want to destroy basically everything. So let's take a look at what this piece of shit Javid actually had to say when he announced this.
The weight of the data shows our vaccinations have kept people safe and they have saved lives, and that this is especially true for vulnerable people in health and care settings. And I'm mindful not only of our need to protect human life, but our imperative to protect the NHS and those services upon which we all rely. I have concluded that all those working in the NHS and social care will have to be vaccinated. We must avoid preventable harm and protect patients in the NHS, protect colleagues in the NHS, and, of course, protect the NHS itself. While our health and social care colleagues are a cross-section of the nation at large, there is no denying that they carry a unique responsibility. They have this responsibility because they are in close contact with some of the most vulnerable people in our society, people that we know that are more likely to suffer serious health consequences if they get COVID-19. So whether it's in our care homes or in our hospitals or any other health or care setting, the first duty of everyone working in health and social care is to avoid preventable harm to the people that they care for.
Nice guy, obviously very, very concerned about people's health. When he's got data like that in the background, and they know they've got that data that I've just covered, they know it's a pile of shite. So, it is a mad, crazy and unscientific world led by a small group of evil maniacs. And finally, I'm going to give a message to all the mainstream media presenters, government officials, government-sponsored scientists, self-proclaimed experts, and most of all the central evil Freemasonic elite that are driving all this shit and vilifying and punishing the unvaccinated, who won't do as they want because they can see through your crap. And what I've got to say is a very, very big... Yeah, I don't need to read that, you can read that. So that's all I've got to say for now. Getting absolutely sick of this shit. So thank you for watching, thank you for listening. Goodbye.